Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to part 2. If you missed part 1, don't worry. You can head over to our channel, Mr. Peter Family, and catch up. Let's dive right in. Chapter 6, Shattered Innocence. The soft whisper of turned pages and hushed conversations created a peaceful soundtrack in Lincoln Elementary's library. But for 3 8-year-old boys crouched behind the tall biography section, the world was about to explode into incomprehensible fragments. Tristan had been looking for a book about sharks when he heard the familiar voice of Mr. Joseph coming from the librarian's desk area. His first instinct was to run over and say hello. Mr. Joseph always had time for them, always seemed genuinely happy to see them. But something in the tone of the conversation made him pause and signal for Gareth and Owen to stay quiet. "I need you to understand the sensitivity of this situation," Mr. Joseph was saying to someone Tristan couldn't see. "These aren't just students I'm working with. They're my sons." The words hit Tristan like a physical blow, making his stomach drop toward his feet. Behind him, he heard Gareth's sharp intake of breath and felt Owen grab his arm with trembling fingers. "Your sons." The other voice belonged to Mrs. Martinez, the school counselor. "Mr. Morgan, I'm confused. The boys' records show no father listed, and Mrs. Newman never mentioned." "She doesn't know I'm volunteering here," Mr. Joseph continued, his voice heavy with what sounded like pain. "We have a complicated history. I wasn't there when they were born, wasn't part of their early years. I'm trying to find a way back into their lives, and this seemed like the best approach." Tristan felt the world tilt sideways. Mr. Joseph, kind, patient Mr. Joseph, who had taught them about fractions and dragons and the importance of being brave, was their father. The father their mother had told them didn't want them? "This is highly irregular," Mrs. Martinez was saying. "If you're truly their father, why the deception? Why not work directly with their mother?" "Because she hates me," Mr. Joseph said simply. "And she has every right to. I left her 8 years ago without explanation. I didn't even know she was pregnant. When I found out about the boys a few months ago, I tried to reconcile with her, but she wants nothing to do with me." Owen made a small, wounded sound that Tristan was afraid might give them away. He quickly put his arm around his youngest brother, pulling him closer while gesturing frantically for Gareth to stay quiet. "So, you decided to circumvent her wishes and gain access to the children through the school." Mrs. Martinez's voice carried clear disapproval. "I needed to know them," Mr. Joseph said, and now he sounded almost desperate. "I missed 8 years of their lives. I missed their first steps, their first words, their first day of school. I couldn't miss everything else too." "Mr. Morgan, what you're describing sounds like a custody issue that should be handled through proper legal channels, not through volunteer work." "I don't want custody," Mr. Joseph said quickly. "I just want to be part of their lives. I want them to know that their father loves them and is proud of them and regrets every day that he wasn't there from the beginning." Tristan's mind was reeling, trying to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about his family. Their father didn't want them. That's what Mom had always implied. But Mr. Joseph sounded like someone who desperately wanted them, someone who was in pain from being separated from them. "The boys have never mentioned their father," Mrs. Martinez said carefully. "How do they understand his absence?" "They think he abandoned them," Mr. Joseph replied, his voice breaking slightly. "Teresa, their mother, told them that I couldn't be part of their lives. I don't think she meant for them to interpret it as rejection, but children fill in the blanks with their own fears." Gareth was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face as he struggled to understand what they were hearing. Tristan felt responsible for protecting his brothers, but he didn't know how to protect them from this. "Mr. Morgan, I'm going to have to recommend that you discuss this situation with Mrs. Newman directly. The boys deserve honesty about their family situation, and deception, even well-intentioned deception, isn't the answer." "You're right," Mr. Joseph said heavily. "I know you're right. I've been so afraid that if I pushed too hard, Teresa would disappear with them entirely. At least this way, I get to see them, get to know who they are. And how do you think they'll feel when they discover you've been lying to them about your identity? The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Tristan looked at his brothers, Owen's tear-stained face, Gareth's expression of betrayal and confusion, and realized they had just discovered the answer to Mrs. Martinez's question. They felt shattered. "We have to go," Tristan whispered, his voice barely audible, "before they see us." The three boys crept away from their hiding spot and made it to the library exit before Owen broke down completely. "He's our daddy," Owen sobbed, not caring who heard him. "Mr. Joseph is our daddy, and he's been pretending he didn't know us." Other students were staring now, and Tristan knew they needed to get somewhere private. He guided his brothers to the empty music room, where they huddled together on the floor behind the piano. "I don't understand," Gareth said, his voice shaking. "Mom said Daddy couldn't be with us, but Mr. Joseph said he wants to be with us. Who's lying?" Tristan wished he was older, wished he had answers that would make sense of this nightmare. "Maybe they're both telling the truth," he said slowly. "Maybe something happened between them that made it complicated. But why didn't he tell us who he was?" Owen asked. "We told him everything about ourselves. We told him about Mom, working lots of jobs, and about how sometimes we wish we had a dad to teach us guys stuff. Why didn't he say anything?" "Maybe he was scared," Tristan offered, though he was just guessing. "Remember the dragon story? About how sometimes people stay away because they're afraid of being rejected." "But we wouldn't have rejected him," Gareth protested. "We've been wanting a dad forever." "Maybe he didn't know that," Tristan said. "Maybe he thought we wouldn't want him because he wasn't there when we were babies." Owen wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Do you think Mom knows he's been coming to our school?" The three boys looked at each other, and Tristan saw his own realization reflected in his brothers' faces. "Mom didn't know, and when she found out there was going to be trouble, we have to tell her," Tristan said reluctantly. "What if she gets mad?" Owen asked. "She's going to get mad anyway," Gareth pointed out. "At least, if we tell her ourselves, she'll know we didn't mean to lie to her." "We weren't lying," Tristan corrected. "We didn't know." But even as he said it, Tristan remembered all the conversations they'd had with Mr. Joseph about their family, about missing their father, about wishing they had someone to teach them how to throw a baseball or help them with their science projects. They had shared their deepest feelings with a stranger who turned out to be the very person they'd been longing for. It felt like a betrayal. Even though his logical mind knew that wasn't fair, the rest of the school day passed in a blur. The boys went through the motions of their classes, but Tristan could tell they were all struggling to focus. During math, Owen kept staring at the door, as if hoping Mr. Joseph would walk in and explain everything. During science, Gareth uncharacteristically failed to participate in the discussion about planets, and Tristan found himself unable to concentrate on anything except the churning confusion in his stomach. When the final bell rang, they walked to the pickup area in unusual silence. Teresa was waiting for them with her tired but genuine smile, and seeing her made Tristan's heart ache with guilt and confusion. "How was school today?" she asked as they climbed into her old car. The three boys exchanged glances. They had never kept secrets from their mother before, and the weight of this knowledge felt enormous. "Fine," Tristan said, which was technically true if you ignored the complete upheaval of their understanding of reality. Teresa looked at them in the rearview mirror as she drove, her maternal instincts clearly sensing that something was wrong. "You're all very quiet today. Did something happen?" "We found out something," Owen said before Tristan could stop him. Teresa's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What kind of something?" Owen looked at his brothers, then back at their mother. "We found out who Mr. Joseph really is." Teresa pulled over so abruptly that the car behind them honked in annoyance. She turned around in her seat to face them, her face pale. "What do you mean?" "We heard him talking to Mrs. Martinez," Gareth explained. "He said we're his sons. He said you hate him, and that's why he didn't tell us who he was." Teresa's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, anger, pain, and something that might have been fear. "Mom," Tristan said carefully, "is Mr. Joseph really our dad?" Teresa closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them, they were filled with tears. "Yes," she said quietly. "He is." "Then why did you tell us our dad didn't want us?" Owen asked, his voice small and hurt. "I never said that," Teresa protested. But even as she spoke, Tristan could see her realizing how her words might have been interpreted. "You said he couldn't be part of our lives," Gareth said. "We thought that meant he didn't want to be." Teresa looked stricken. "Oh, sweetheart, no. It wasn't that he didn't want you. It was that it's complicated." "Everything is complicated with grown-ups," Owen said, with 8-year-old frustration. "Why can't anyone just tell us the truth?" "You want the truth?" Teresa asked, her voice shaking. "The truth is that your father and I loved each other very much 8 years ago. But then he left without saying goodbye, and I didn't know how to find him, to tell him about you. When I finally stopped looking for him, I had to accept that you were going to grow up without him." "But he's here now," Tristan pointed out. "He's been here for weeks, helping us and being nice to us and acting like he cares about us." "He does care about you," Teresa admitted reluctantly. "I can see that." "Then why can't we just be a family?" Owen asked, his voice breaking. "Why does everything have to be so hard?" Teresa's tears spilled over then, and she reached back to touch Owen's face. "Because sometimes when people hurt each other, it takes time to heal, and sometimes the healing is more complicated when there are children involved." "Are you still hurt?" Gareth asked quietly. Teresa was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "I am." "Are you hurt because he left or because he came back?" Tristan asked with the perceptiveness that sometimes surprised adults. "Both," Teresa admitted. "I'm hurt because he left, and I'm scared because he came back. And I'm angry because he's been lying to all of us for weeks." "See, he wasn't really lying," Owen said, surprising everyone. "He just wasn't telling us everything. There's a difference." "Owen. He never said he wasn't our dad," Owen continued with the logic that 8-year-olds sometimes possess. "He just didn't tell us he was. And maybe he was scared to tell us because he thought we wouldn't want him." Tristan looked at his youngest brother with new respect. Owen was often the most emotional of the three, but sometimes he saw things more clearly than anyone else. "Do you want him?" Teresa asked quietly. "Do you want him to be part of your lives?" The three boys looked at each other, communicating in the wordless way that siblings sometimes can. "We want our family to be whole," Tristan said carefully. "But we don't want you to be sad." "And we don't want him to leave again," Gareth added. "And we don't want any more secrets," Owen finished. Teresa wiped her eyes and started the car again. "Okay," she said, though her voice shook. "No more secrets. When we get home, we're going to have a very long conversation about your father and about what it might mean for our family if he becomes part of our lives." As they drove home, Tristan stared out the window and tried to process everything that had happened. In the space of one afternoon, Mr. Joseph had transformed from a kind volunteer into their father. Their family structure had been completely redefined, and their mother had admitted that the story they'd been told about their origin wasn't the whole truth. But underneath all the confusion and hurt, Tristan felt something else, hope, because Mr. Joseph, their father, had been trying to find a way to be with them. And their mother, despite her tears and anger, was willing to have conversations about making their family whole. Maybe, Tristan thought, sometimes the most important truths were worth the pain of discovering them. That evening, as they sat around their small kitchen table with cups of hot chocolate and a box of tissues, Teresa began to tell them the real story of their parents' relationship and the choices that had led to this moment. And for the first time in their 8 years of life, the Newman boys began to understand that families were more complicated, more fragile, and more precious than they had ever imagined. Chapter 7. The Vigil at 3:17 in the afternoon on a sea. Tuesday in December, the universe reminded Teresa Newman that some things matter more than pride, and the lesson came with the screech of tires and the sound of her own heart breaking. She was in the middle of inventory at the diner when her phone rang with the call every parent dreads. Principal Hayes's voice was calm but urgent, the kind of professional composure that barely concealed panic. "Mrs. Newman, there's been an accident. Owen was hit by a car in the crosswalk outside the school. He's being taken to Children's Hospital, and you need to get there immediately." The phone slipped from Teresa's hands, clattering to the floor as the words penetrated her consciousness. Owen, her baby, the child who still sometimes crawled into her bed during thunderstorms, who collected smooth rocks and believed that wishes made on dandelions always came true. "I have to go," she told her manager, grabbing her purse and coat without waiting for a response. "My son, there's been an accident." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of red lights and desperate prayers. Teresa's hands shook on the steering wheel as she tried not to imagine the worst-case scenarios that her maternal mind insisted on conjuring. Owen was small for his age, sensitive, trusting. The thought of him lying broken and scared was almost more than she could bear. She arrived at Children's Hospital to find chaos in the emergency department. Crying children, anxious parents, the controlled urgency of medical professionals managing multiple crises. Teresa pushed through to the reception desk, her voice surprisingly steady as she gave Owen's name and information. "Room 237, the nurse told her. "Take the elevator to the second floor and follow the signs to Pediatric ICU." Pediatric ICU. The words hit Teresa like physical blows. ICU meant serious. ICU meant life-threatening. ICU meant her 8-year-old son was fighting for his life while she had been counting coffee cups and taking orders for hamburgers. She ran down the hospital corridor, her footsteps echoing off the polished floors, following the signs that led to her son. But when she reached room 237, she stopped short at what she saw through the glass door. Joseph Morgan sat beside Owen's bed, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, and his expensive suit wrinkled as if he had been there for hours. His hand rested gently on Owen's small one, and his lips were moving in what looked like prayer. Tristan and Gareth sat in chairs nearby, their faces pale and frightened, but clearly being comforted by their father's presence. Teresa pushed through the door, her emotions a tangle of relief, gratitude, and confusion. "How is he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Joseph looked up and Teresa saw that his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and unshed tears. "Stable," he said quietly. "He has a concussion, a broken arm, and some internal bruising, but the doctors think he's going to be okay." Teresa sank into the chair on the other side of Owen's bed, finally allowing herself to look at her injured child. He seemed impossibly small against the white hospital sheets, his face pale but peaceful in drug-induced sleep. Various monitors beeped softly around him, reassuring her that his heart was beating, his lungs were working, his body was fighting to heal. "What happened?" she asked. "A car ran the red light," Tristan answered, his voice shaky. "Owen was crossing with the crossing guard, but the driver wasn't paying attention. Mr. Joseph, Dad, was here when they brought him in." Teresa looked at Joseph with questions in her eyes. "How did you know?" "I was picking up Tristan and Gareth for our usual library session when it happened," Joseph explained. I saw the accident, called 911, and rode in the ambulance with him. I couldn't leave him alone. Have you been here the whole time? Joseph nodded. About 4 hours. The doctors have been in and out, but he hasn't woken up yet. They said that's normal with the concussion. Teresa reached out and touched Owen's forehead, brushing his hair back from his face. Has he said anything? He asked. For you right after they brought him in, Joseph said softly. Before the pain medication made him sleepy, I told him you were coming, that you'd be here soon. Teresa felt tears threaten again. Thank you for being here, for staying with him. I know you didn't have to. Yes, I did, Joseph interrupted gently. He's my son. There's nowhere else I would be. The simple statement hit Teresa with unexpected force. For the first time since Joseph had reappeared in their lives, she saw him not as the man who had left her, but as a father protecting his child. The distinction mattered more than she had realized. A doctor entered the room, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, who introduced herself as Dr. Patterson. Mrs. Newman, I'm glad you're here. Owen is doing very well, all things considered. The CT scan shows a mild concussion, which means we'll want to monitor him overnight for any changes. The broken arm is a clean break that should heal without complications. The internal bruising looks worse than it is. No damage to organs, just some deep tissue trauma that will heal with time. When will he wake up? Teresa asked. Soon, I would expect. We've reduced his pain medication now that we've completed all the necessary scans and x-rays. He may be groggy and confused at first, but that's normal. As if summoned by the conversation, Owen's eyelids fluttered open. His gaze was unfocused. At first, moving around the room with the slow confusion of someone emerging from deep sleep. Mom, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I'm here, baby, Teresa said, leaning forward to kiss his forehead. I'm right here. Owen's eyes found Joseph next, and a small smile appeared on his pale face. Mr. Joseph, Dad, you stayed. Joseph's composure cracked slightly. Of course I stayed. I told you I would. I was scared, Owen admitted. When I woke up in the ambulance, everything hurt and I didn't know where I was. But Dad was there, Gareth said, moving closer to the bed. He held your hand the whole way to the hospital. And he told the doctors all about your allergies and your medical history, Tristan added. He knew everything, like he'd been taking care of us forever. Teresa looked at Joseph with surprise. How did you know about his allergies? I've been paying attention, Joseph said simply, to everything. Their medical records, their preferences, their fears. I may have missed their early years, but I didn't want to miss anything else. Dr. Patterson checked Owen's pupils with a small flashlight and asked him some basic questions to assess his cognitive function. Satisfied with his responses, she turned to the adults. I'd like to keep him overnight for observation, but barring any complications, he should be able to go home tomorrow. He'll need to take it easy for a few weeks while the concussion heals, and the arm will be in a cast for about 6 weeks. After the doctor left, Teresa found herself in the strange position of sharing a vigil with the man she had spent months trying to keep out of their lives. But watching Joseph with Owen, seeing the gentleness in his touch, the genuine concern in his eyes, the way he seemed to know exactly what her son needed, she began to understand something that had been hiding beneath. Her anger and fear, Joseph wasn't trying to buy his way into their lives or manipulate them for his own purposes. He was simply a father who loved his children and wanted to be part of their world. You can go home if you want, she told him quietly, while the boys dozed in their chairs. I'll stay with him tonight. I'm not leaving, Joseph said firmly. Not unless you really want me to. Teresa looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. His expensive suit was wrinkled beyond repair. His hair was mussed from running his hands through it. There were coffee stains on his shirt and exhaustion lines around his eyes. He looked nothing like the polished businessman she had been trying to keep at arm's length, and everything like a father who had spent the day fearing for his child's life. "Stay," she said quietly. "Please." Something shifted in Joseph's expression, a carefully guarded hope that he tried not to let show too clearly. They settled into the rhythm of hospital waiting, checking monitors, talking to nurses, taking turns getting coffee from the machine down the hall. Tristan and Gareth eventually fell asleep in their chairs, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the day. Owen drifted in and out of consciousness, reassured by the presence of both his parents. Around midnight, when the hospital had settled into the quiet efficiency of the night shift, Teresa and Joseph found themselves alone together for the first time since the restaurant incident months earlier. "I owe you an apology," Teresa said quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping children. Joseph looked surprised. "For what?" "For not giving you a chance to explain yourself before today. For making assumptions about your motives. For keeping the boys from you longer than necessary. Teresa, you don't owe me anything. You were protecting them." "I was protecting myself," Teresa corrected, "and using them as an excuse to do it." Joseph was quiet for a moment, watching Owen's peaceful face. "I handled everything wrong from the beginning. I should have been honest with you about the volunteer work. I should have respected your boundaries instead of trying to work around them." "Why didn't you?" Teresa asked. "Tell me the truth. Why did you think deception was better than honesty?" Joseph ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Because I was afraid you'd disappear with them if I pushed too hard. I'd lost 9 years already. I couldn't bear the thought of losing more time." "And what changed your mind?" "About being honest, I mean." "Watching you today," Joseph said simply. "Seeing how terrified you were, how much you love them, how good of a mother you've been to them all these years. I realize that whatever else has happened between us, we both want the same thing. We want them to be happy and safe." Teresa felt tears threatening again. "I've been so angry for so long I forgot what it felt like to think about what they might want instead of what I was afraid of." "What are you afraid of?" Joseph asked gently. Teresa was quiet for a long time, watching her sons sleep and trying to find words for fears she had never fully acknowledged. "I'm afraid of them loving you more than me," she admitted finally. "I'm afraid of becoming unnecessary. I'm afraid of you getting bored with the reality of parenting and walking away again. I'm afraid of teaching them that love means disappointment." Joseph leaned forward in his chair, his voice intense but quiet. "Teresa, listen to me. Nothing could ever make me love them less or make me walk away from them again, and nothing could ever make you unnecessary. You created 3 incredible human beings and raised them to be kind, intelligent, compassionate people. You are irreplaceable to them and to me." "To you?" Teresa asked, her heart stuttering. "I never stopped loving you," Joseph said quietly. "Even when I convinced myself I had, even when I tried to build a life without you, even when I told myself I was doing the right thing by staying away. Seeing you again, seeing the woman you've become, the mother you are. I love you more now than I did 9 years ago." Teresa stared at him, seeing truth in his eyes along with vulnerability and hope and fear. "Joseph," she started, but he held up a hand. "I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back or pretend the last 9 years didn't happen. I'm just asking you to let me be part of their lives. Let me be their father. Let me help you carry the load instead of doing everything alone." Teresa looked around the hospital room, at Owen sleeping peacefully with his father's vigil watching over him, at Tristan and Gareth sprawled in uncomfortable chairs because they hadn't wanted to leave their brother, at Joseph, who had spent the entire day putting his children's needs before his own comfort. "What would that look like?" she asked carefully. "I don't know," Joseph admitted. "I've never been a father before, but I want to learn. I want to be at school functions and soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. I want to help with homework and teach them how to throw a baseball and be there when they need someone to talk to about things they can't discuss with their mother." "And what about us?" Teresa asked. "What about the history between us?" "What about it?" We hurt each other, we made mistakes, we've both grown up. Maybe it's time to focus on building something new instead of staying trapped in what went wrong before. Teresa was quiet for a long time, processing his words and trying to imagine what their lives might look like if she let herself trust him again. "I need time," she said finally. "And I need to see consistency, not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but showing up every day and being patient when things are difficult and proving that you're committed to the long haul." "How much time?" Joseph asked. "I don't know. Enough time for me to believe that this version of you is real and permanent. Enough time for the boys to adjust to having a father in their lives. Enough time for us to figure out how to co-parent without killing each other." Joseph smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since he reappeared in their lives. "I can work with that. And Joseph?" Teresa added. "No more secrets. If we're going to try to make this work, everything has to be honest and transparent. The boys deserve that, and so do I." "Agreed," Joseph said. "No more secrets." As the night wore on, they took turns sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chairs, checking on Owen, and talking quietly about practical things, how to tell the boys about their decision, how to handle custody arrangements, how to manage the transition from single mother to co-parenting team. When Owen woke up the next morning, confused and sore but clearly on the mend, he found both his parents there together, not arguing or tense, but united in their concern for him. "Are you guys okay?" he asked with the perceptiveness that children sometimes possess. "We're working on it," Teresa said honestly. "Does that mean Dad can come to our house sometimes?" Owen asked, hopefully. Teresa looked at Joseph, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "We're going to take it slow and see how things go. But yes, I think Dad will be spending more time with us." Owen's smile was brighter than any of the expensive gifts Joseph had tried to send. And watching her son's joy, Teresa felt something inside her chest begin to heal, something she hadn't even realized was still broken. Chapter 8. The Public Declaration. The Springfield Elementary Winter Festival buzzed with the controlled chaos of hundreds of children, parents, and teachers gathered in the decorated gymnasium. But for Teresa Newman, the evening was about to become a moment of truth that would change everything. She stood near the punch bowl with the other parents, watching Tristan, Gareth, and Owen perform in their class presentation about Arctic animals. The boys had been nervous about their parts, but they were doing beautifully. Tristan explaining polar bear adaptations with scientific precision, Gareth making the audience laugh with his walrus impressions, and Owen shyly but clearly describing penguin families. Teresa felt a familiar swell of maternal pride, tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that these moments of pure joy had become more precious since Owen's accident 3 weeks earlier. The experience of nearly losing one of her children had shifted something fundamental in her perspective, making her more aware of how quickly things could change and how important it was to focus on what truly mattered. "They're doing great," said a quiet voice beside her. Teresa turned to find Joseph approaching with 2 cups of punch, his presence both expected and still slightly surreal. Over the past 3 weeks, he had become a regular part of their daily routine, picking up the boys from school, helping with homework, joining them for dinner twice a week. The arrangement was still new and sometimes awkward, but it was working better than Teresa had dared to hope. "They practiced their parts for hours," Teresa said, accepting the punch with a smile. Owen was so worried about forgetting his lines. He's doing perfectly," Joseph observed, his eyes fixed on his youngest son with obvious pride. Teresa studied Joseph's profile, noting how naturally he fit into this scene of domestic normalcy. He had traded his expensive suits for casual, khakis and button-down shirts that looked like they belonged on a suburban father rather than a billionaire CEO. More importantly, he seemed genuinely comfortable here among the other parents, not like someone playing a role or fulfilling an obligation. "Mr. Morgan," called out Mrs. Patterson, Gareth's teacher, as she approached with a warm smile. "I'm so glad you could make it tonight. The boys have been talking about you non-stop since you started volunteering." "I wouldn't miss it," Joseph replied, and Teresa could hear the sincerity in his voice. "And Mrs. Newman," Mrs. Patterson continued, "you must be so proud of how well the boys are adjusting to having their father involved in their school life. It's wonderful to see a family come together like this." Teresa felt a flush of awkwardness at the teacher's assumption that this was a simple reunion story. But before she could think of how to respond, the microphone on the small stage squeaked with feedback. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Principal Hayes, "we'd like to invite all families to gather around the Christmas tree for our traditional holiday wish ceremony. Children, please find your parents and join us for this special moment." Teresa watched as families began clustering around the large decorated tree at the center of the gymnasium. She saw the Johnsons with their twin daughters, the Martinez family with their 4 children ranging from kindergarten to high school, the Patels with their son who was in Tristan's class. All of them looked so natural together, so effortlessly, unified in a way that Teresa still wasn't sure she and Joseph could achieve. "Mom, Dad!" Owen's voice cut through her thoughts as he bounded over to them, his face flushed with excitement from the performance. "Did you see? I remembered all my lines." "You were perfect," Teresa said, hugging him tightly. "I'm so proud of you." Tristan and Gareth joined them moments later, equally excited and looking for praise and reassurance from their parents. "That was amazing," Joseph told them, his voice warm with genuine enthusiasm. "All 3 of you were confident and clear and entertaining. You should be very proud of yourselves." Teresa watched her sons bask in their father's approval and felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her was still adjusting to sharing these moments with someone else, but a larger part was beginning to appreciate having another person who was genuinely invested in her children's happiness and success. "All right, everyone," Principal Hayes called out. "Please gather in a circle around the tree. We're going to start with our youngest students sharing their holiday wishes." The ceremony began with kindergartners stepping forward to share innocent wishes for toys and snow days and world peace. As the age groups progressed, the wishes became more sophisticated but no less heartfelt, students hoping for good grades, for grandparents to get better, for families to be happy. When they reached the 3rd grade students, Teresa felt her stomach tighten with nervousness. Public speaking had never been easy for any of her boys, and she worried about them being put on the spot in front of such a large crowd. "Tristan Newman," Principal Hayes called out. Teresa's eldest son stepped forward with the serious demeanor that made him seem older than his 8 years. He looked around the circle of faces, his gaze stopping briefly on Teresa and Joseph before he spoke. "I wish for my family to always stay together," he said clearly, "and for everyone to remember that families come in all different shapes, but love is what makes them real." Teresa felt tears prick her eyes at her son's wisdom and his obvious attempt to normalize their unconventional situation. "Gareth Newman," the principal continued. Gareth bounded forward with his characteristic energy, grinning at the crowd. "I wish for more adventures with my dad," he announced, "and for my mom to not worry so much about everything because we're all going to be okay." The simple confidence in Gareth's voice made Teresa's throat tighten with emotion. Her middle son had always been an optimist, but hearing him express such faith in their family's future was both touching and slightly overwhelming. And finally, Owen Newman. Teresa's youngest son approached the center of the circle more slowly than his brothers, his natural shyness making him hesitate before speaking. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on Teresa and Joseph standing together at the edge of the circle. "I wish," Owen said, his small voice carrying clearly in the quiet gymnasium, for my mom and dad to be happy together, because when they're happy, our whole family feels safe. The words hit Teresa like a physical blow, both because of their simple truth and because of what they revealed about Owen's perception of their family dynamics. She glanced at Joseph and saw her own surprise and emotion reflected in his expression. But Owen wasn't finished. "And I wish," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "for everyone to know that sometimes dads come back when you think they never will. And that's okay, because love is more important than being mad about the past." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd, and Teresa saw several parents wiping their eyes. Owen's innocent wisdom had captured something universal about forgiveness and second chances that resonated with the adults in the room. Owen started to step back into the circle, but then he paused and looked directly at Teresa and Joseph. "Mom, Dad," he called out, his 8-year-old voice carrying to every corner of the gymnasium. "Can you come here for a minute?" Teresa felt every eye in the room turned toward them, and her first instinct was to decline politely and fade back into the crowd. But something in Owen's expression, hope mixed with determination, made her step forward instead. Joseph moved with her, and together they approached their youngest son in front of the entire school community. "What is it, sweetheart?" Teresa asked quietly, hoping to keep whatever was about to happen as private as possible. But Owen had other plans. "I want everyone to know," he announced, turning to address the crowd, "that this is my dad. He wasn't with us when we were little, but he's with us now, and he loves us very much." Teresa's face burned with embarrassment, but before she could redirect Owen's attention, Tristan and Gareth stepped forward to flank their younger brother. "Our dad came back," Gareth added, his voice carrying the same clear confidence as Owen's. "And even though it was complicated at first, we're a real family now." "We want everyone to know," Tristan concluded, "because we're proud of our family, and we don't want to pretend anymore that it's just Mum taking care of us." Teresa stood frozen in the center of the circle, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes watching this very public declaration of their family status. Part of her wanted to sink through the floor from embarrassment, but a larger part was overwhelmed by her son's obvious pride in claiming Joseph as their father. "Well," Principal Hayes said into the stunned silence, "I think that's one of the most beautiful holiday wishes we've ever heard. Let's give the Newman family a round of applause for their courage and honesty." The applause started slowly, but built to genuine enthusiasm as the crowd responded to the boy's obvious joy. Teresa felt Joseph's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of support and solidarity. "Are you okay?" he murmured, leaning close enough that only she could hear. Teresa looked around the gymnasium at the faces of neighbors and teachers and other parents who were smiling at them with warmth and acceptance rather than judgment, at her 3 sons who were beaming with happiness at having publicly claimed their father, at Joseph, whose expression held wonder and gratitude and love. "I'm okay," she said, and realized she meant it. After the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, several parents approached them with congratulations and expressions of support. Mrs. Martinez hugged Teresa and told her how happy she was to see their family reunited. Mr. Patterson, whose son was in Owen's class, shook Joseph's hand and welcomed him to the parent community. The principal made a point of thanking them for their honesty and expressing her hope that their family would be very happy together. As they walked to the parking lot together, the boys chattering excitedly about the evening's events, Teresa found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. "That was unexpected," Joseph said quietly as they reached their cars. "Which part?" Teresa asked. "Owen's public announcement or the fact that people actually seemed happy for us?" "All of it," Joseph admitted. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to point out that I don't deserve this level of acceptance and forgiveness." Teresa stopped walking and turned to face him. In the soft glow of the parking lot lights, she could see the vulnerability in his expression, the disbelief that his children could love him so openly, and that she could be standing here beside him as an equal partner rather than an adversary. "Maybe," she said carefully, "it's time to stop waiting for disaster and start believing that good things can happen to us." Even after everything I did wrong, Teresa looked at their 3 sons, who were currently engaged in an animated discussion about whether they could convince their parents to stop for ice cream on the way home. "Look at them," she said softly. "Look at how happy they are. Look at how proud they were tonight to claim you as their father. Maybe the question isn't whether you deserve forgiveness, but whether you're brave enough to accept it and build something beautiful with it." Joseph was quiet for a long moment, watching their children with an expression of wonder that made Teresa's heart ache with remembered love. "I want to try," he said finally. "I want to be the father they deserve and the partner you need. I want to build something that will last this time. It won't be easy," Teresa warned. "There will be hard days and arguments and moments when we both wonder if we're making a mistake." "I know," Joseph said, "but I'm not going anywhere this time. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm committed to making this work." Teresa felt something shift inside her chest, a wall that had been standing for 9 years, beginning to develop serious cracks. "Okay," she said quietly, "let's try." The boys chose that moment to run back to them, their faces bright with excitement and hope. "So," Gareth said with the directness that 8-year-olds were famous for, "does this mean Dad can come home with us tonight?" Teresa and Joseph looked at each other, both realizing that their children had just forced them to confront a question they hadn't yet discussed. "What do you think?" Joseph asked Teresa, leaving the decision in her hands. Teresa looked at her sons' hopeful faces, thought about the evening's events, and made a choice that 3 months ago would have been unthinkable. "I think," she said slowly, "we could all use some ice cream and a movie night, if Dad wants to join us." The boys' cheers were loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood, and as they piled into their respective cars to caravan home together, Teresa felt something she hadn't experienced in 9 years, the possibility of a complete family. But as they drove through the night toward home, neither Teresa nor Joseph realized that their biggest test was still ahead of them, and that sometimes the hardest part of rebuilding wasn't the grand gestures or public declarations, but the quiet daily work of learning to trust again. Chapter 9. The Breaking Point. Spring arrived with the cruel promise of new beginnings, but for Joseph Morgan, each passing day felt like another step toward an ending he couldn't prevent. Each sunrise a reminder that time was running out for dreams he had carried for too long. 6 months had passed since the winter festival. 6 months of showing up every single day, of being present for every soccer game and parent-teacher conference, of helping with homework and mediating sibling disputes, and learning the intricate rhythms of family life that most fathers absorbed gradually over years. He had moved into an apartment close to Teresa's building, near enough to be available whenever the boys needed him, but far enough to respect the boundaries she still maintained like fortress walls, built from 8 years of hurt and disappointment. The apartment was expensive but sterile, decorated with furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than a home. Joseph had tried to make it welcoming for the boys, had bought video games and art supplies and books, had created a space where they could be comfortable during their visits. But despite his efforts, it still felt temporary, like a hotel room where he was waiting for permission to check out and go home. Joseph sat in his car outside Lincoln Elementary, watching through the windshield as other parents chatted easily with each other while waiting for dismissal. He had become a familiar face in this routine, accepted by the community, welcomed by teachers, embraced wholeheartedly by his sons. But Teresa remained an enigma, present but distant, cooperative but guarded, kind, but never quite warm enough to suggest that his presence was truly wanted, rather than simply tolerated. The spring sunshine felt warm on his face through the car window, but inside, Joseph felt the growing weight of a sadness he couldn't shake. He had thought that consistency would eventually break down Teresa's walls, that showing up every day would prove his commitment in ways that words never could. Instead, she seemed to be getting more skilled at maintaining emotional distance while going through the motions of co-parenting. "Mr. Morgan," Owen's voice cut through his brooding as all three boys ran toward the car, their backpacks bouncing and their faces bright with the particular joy that came from seeing a parent at pickup. The sight of them never failed to lift his spirits, even on days when the future felt uncertain. "How was school today?" Joseph asked as they climbed into his car, a question that had become as natural as breathing, though the answer mattered more to him than the boys could possibly understand. "Awesome," Gareth announced, his enthusiasm infectious as always. "We got to dissect owl pellets in science, and I found a whole mouse skull. Mrs. Patterson said it was the most complete skeleton anyone in our class had ever found." "Gross," Tristan said. But he was smiling in the way that suggested he was secretly impressed by his brother's discovery. "I got an A on my book report about dragons and their role in different mythologies. And I learned how to spell metamorphosis," Owen added proudly, his small chest puffing out with achievement. "Want to hear me spell it? Metamorphosis. And Owen carefully spelled out the complex word. Joseph felt the familiar ache in his chest that came from loving these children so completely, while knowing that their mother still held part of herself back from him. He had hoped that time and consistency would eventually wear down Teresa's defenses, but instead, she seemed to be building new walls as quickly as he tried to dismantle the old ones. They arrived at Teresa's apartment building, where Joseph would spend the next few hours helping with homework and making dinner, while Teresa worked her evening shift at the department store. It had become their routine. He would care for the boys in the evenings, and she would take the morning responsibilities. They were like ships passing in the night, efficiently managing their children's needs while barely maintaining personal contact. The arrangement worked, but it didn't feel like a family. It felt like a business partnership with shared assets, clinical and efficient, but lacking the warmth and connection that Joseph had been hoping to rebuild. Teresa was waiting in the lobby, her purse slung over her shoulder and her car keys already in hand, dressed in the navy blue vest that marked her as a department store employee. The sight of her in that uniform always made Joseph's chest tighten with guilt. She was working retail in the evenings because she needed the extra income that his child support payments should have been covering if she had been willing to accept them. "How was your day?" Joseph asked, the question automatic after months of practice, though her answers had become increasingly brief and distant. "Fine," Teresa replied, which was her standard response, polite but revealing nothing about her actual thoughts or feelings. "Owen has a math worksheet that needs to be finished, and there are leftovers in the refrigerator for dinner. I should be home by 9, maybe 9:15 if they keep us late for inventory." "Teresa," Joseph said as she started toward the door, something in his tone making her pause with her hand on the glass. "Could we talk when you get back tonight? There's something I need to discuss with you." Something flickered in Teresa's expression. Wariness, perhaps, or resignation, or maybe just exhaustion from the constant emotional management that their situation required. "Is everything okay with the boys?" "The boys are fine. This is about us." Teresa's walls went up so visibly that Joseph could practically see them snapping into place like armor designed to protect her from whatever emotional complexity he was about to introduce into their carefully managed routine. "Joseph, we've talked about this," she said, her voice carrying the patience of someone who had explained something many times before. "We're co-parenting successfully. That's what matters. That's what the boys need." "Is it?" Joseph asked quietly, his voice carrying months of suppressed frustration. "Because sometimes I feel like we're just two strangers who happen to share the same children." Teresa's jaw tightened, her body language shifting into defensive mode. "That's what we are." The words hit Joseph like physical blows, each syllable a hammer against the hope he had been carefully nurturing for months. "We don't have to be." "Yes, we do," Teresa said firmly, her voice gaining strength as she reinforced her own boundaries. "We tried the other thing 9 years ago and it didn't work. This arrangement is better for everyone." She left before Joseph could respond, and he stood in the lobby for several minutes, trying to process the conversation and the growing certainty that no amount of patience and consistency was going to change Teresa's mind about keeping him at arm's length. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the loneliness he felt, despite being surrounded by the evidence of other people's lives. Upstairs, the boys were waiting with their usual enthusiasm for the evening routine. Joseph helped Owen with his math worksheet, listening to Gareth read aloud from his chapter book and discuss Tristan's upcoming science fair project about renewable energy sources. He made dinner from Teresa's leftovers, spaghetti and meatballs, that the boys declared almost as good as Mom's, supervised bath time, and read bedtime stories with the comfortable efficiency of someone who had been doing this for years rather than months. But underneath the domestic normalcy, Joseph felt a growing sense of hopelessness that he couldn't shake. He was playing house, going through the motions of being a father and a family man, but Teresa's walls remained as high as ever. If anything, she seemed to be pulling further away from him as time went on, more determined than ever to keep their relationship strictly professional. When Teresa returned from work at 9:23, she found him sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the city lights. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, a peaceful domestic scene that felt hollow to Joseph despite its surface tranquility. "How were they tonight?" she asked, hanging her coat on the back of a chair, with movements that suggested she was tired from a long day of customer service and standing on her feet. "Perfect. As always," Joseph replied, his voice carrying an emotional weight that had nothing to do with the children's behavior. Owen finished his math homework without any tears. Gareth read 2 chapters and wanted to read more, and Tristan practiced his presentation about solar panels. "They're all asleep." Teresa nodded and moved around the kitchen, cleaning up the dinner dishes Joseph had already washed and putting away items that were already in their proper places. It was her way of avoiding the conversation she knew was coming, of creating busy work that would delay whatever emotional complexity Joseph was about to introduce into their evening. "You said you wanted to talk," she said finally, not looking at him as she rearranged the salt and pepper shakers for the 3rd time. Joseph set down his tea and tried to find words for feelings that had been building for months, emotions that had reached a breaking point he could no longer ignore. "I can't keep doing this," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that had been months in the making. Teresa's hands stilled on the dish towel she was folding, her movements freezing as she processed his words. "Doing what?" "Pretending that this arrangement is enough. Pretending that being civil co-parents is the same thing as being a family. Pretending that I don't still love you and that it doesn't kill me every day to be this close to you while feeling like a complete stranger." Teresa turned around then, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes reflecting something that might have been fear. "Joseph, we've been through this. What we had before is over. We're different people now." "Are we?" Joseph asked, standing up from the table with movements that suggested he was preparing for battle. Because I see glimpses of the woman I fell in love with every time you laugh at something one of the boys says. I see her when you're worried about them, when you're proud of them, when you're just being their mother. She's still there, Teresa. We're still there underneath all the hurt and fear. You're wrong, Teresa said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. Am I? Then why do you work extra shifts whenever I'm supposed to have dinner with you and the boys? Why do you suddenly have errands to run every time I suggest we all do something together as a family? Why do you act like spending time with me is a necessary evil rather than something that might actually be pleasant? Teresa's carefully constructed composure began to crack, her professional mask slipping to reveal the raw emotions beneath. Because I can't do this again, Joseph. I can't let myself care about you and then watch you leave when things get complicated or difficult or boring. I'm not going to leave, Joseph said desperately, his voice rising with months of suppressed emotion. How many times do I have to prove that to you? You can't prove it, Teresa shot back, her voice rising to match his. You can't guarantee that 5 years from now, when the novelty of being a father wears off, you won't decide that this life is too ordinary for Joseph Morgan. You can't promise that you won't meet someone younger and less complicated who doesn't come with 3 children and a history of being abandoned. Is that really what you think of me? Joseph asked, his voice quiet with hurt. After 6 months of showing up every single day, after never missing a commitment or breaking a promise, you still think I'm capable of abandoning my children? I think you're capable of convincing yourself that leaving them would be for their own good, Teresa said, and Joseph heard 8 years of pain in her voice, just like you did with me. The accusation hung in the air between them like a poisonous cloud. Joseph felt something inside his chest break, not from anger, but from the realization that nothing he could do would ever be enough to overcome Teresa's fear. She had built her walls so high that even she couldn't see over them anymore, couldn't imagine a world where love didn't inevitably lead to abandonment. I see, he said quietly, his voice unnaturally calm as the fight drained out of him. No matter what I do, no matter how consistent I am, no matter how much I prove that I've changed, you're never going to trust me again. Joseph, no. It's okay, Joseph interrupted, his voice carrying the hollow ring of defeat. I understand. You've built your walls so high that even you can't see over them anymore. You're so afraid of being hurt again that you'd rather live in emotional isolation than take the risk of being happy. Teresa's eyes filled with tears, but her expression remained stubborn, her jaw set in the way that meant she wasn't going to bend, no matter how much pressure was applied. I am happy. The boys are happy. This arrangement works. For you, maybe, Joseph said, moving toward the door with the slow movements of someone who had finally accepted defeat. But it's not working for me anymore. I can't keep loving someone who's determined to keep me at a distance. I can't keep hoping for something that's never going to happen. What are you saying? Teresa asked, and for the first time he heard genuine fear in her voice. Joseph paused at the door, his hand on the handle, his heart breaking with every word he was about to speak. I'm saying that I'll always be here for the boys. I'll never abandon them or stop being their father. But I can't keep torturing myself by trying to rebuild something with someone who doesn't want it rebuilt. Joseph, wait. But he was already gone, leaving Teresa alone in her kitchen with the echo of his words and the devastating realization that she might have finally pushed away the one person who had never stopped fighting for her. Outside in the hallway, Joseph leaned against the wall and tried to catch his breath. Every instinct told him to go back, to apologize, to keep trying. But he had finally reached his breaking point, the place where love wasn't enough to overcome the constant rejection and emotional distance. He had given Teresa 6 months to trust him again, 6 months to see that he had changed, 6 months to let him prove that he wasn't going anywhere. Instead, She had spent those 6 months perfecting the art of keeping him close enough to co-parent, but far enough away to prevent any real intimacy or connection. The spring air felt cool against his face as he walked to his car, each step taking him further away from the family he had been trying so hard to rebuild. He had thought love and persistence could heal any wound, bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle. But Teresa's fear was stronger than his love, and he was finally ready to admit defeat. As he drove back to his empty apartment through streets that seemed particularly lonely in the darkness, Joseph made a decision that felt like tearing out his own heart. He would continue being the best father he could be to Tristan, Gareth and Owen, but he would stop trying to win back their mother. Some battles, no matter how worth fighting, were simply unwinnable. The apartment felt even more sterile than usual when he returned, the silence emphasizing the loneliness that had become his constant companion. Joseph poured himself a drink he didn't want and sat in a chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent, staring at family photos he had taken without permission during soccer games and school events. He thought about the life he had imagined when he first discovered the boys existed. Family dinners and bedtime stories and lazy Sunday mornings, the simple domestic happiness that he had convinced himself was still possible. But Teresa's walls were higher than his dreams, and he was tired of battering himself against defenses that only grew stronger with each assault. Tomorrow, he would call his lawyer and discuss the custody petition he had withdrawn months ago. Tomorrow, he would start the process of building a legal framework for his relationship with his children, since an emotional one seemed impossible. Tomorrow, he would begin the painful work of accepting that some loves were meant to remain unrequited. But tonight, he would allow himself to grieve for the family that might have been, for the woman who had never stopped loving him but could never trust him again, for the future that had died before it was ever really born. Chapter 10. The Final Choice. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in late May, delivered by a courier who waited while Teresa signed for it with trembling hands that betrayed the fear she tried to keep hidden behind her composed expression. Inside was a formal document that made her blood run cold. A petition for joint custody filed by Joseph Morgan, outlining a comprehensive plan for shared parenting responsibilities and requesting official legal recognition of his paternal rights. Teresa sank into her kitchen chair, reading the legal language that would forever change the informal arrangement they had maintained for nearly 7 months. Joseph was no longer asking for her permission to be part of his children's lives. He was claiming his legal right to them, with or without her cooperation. The accompanying letter, written in Joseph's careful handwriting rather than typed by his attorneys, explained his reasoning in terms that were both heartbreaking and infuriating. Teresa, I can't continue living in limbo, hoping that someday you'll trust me enough to be a real partner in raising our children. I love you, but I can't keep sacrificing my relationship with the boys for the possibility of reconciliation that you've made clear will never happen. They deserve a father who has the security of knowing he can't be shut out of their lives on a whim. And I deserve the legal right to protect and provide for them without depending on your goodwill. Teresa read the letter 3 times, each reading making her angrier and more frightened. Joseph was forcing her hand, making her choose between the comfortable distance she had maintained and the terrifying prospect of truly sharing her children with a man who still had the power to break her heart. The boys were at school, oblivious to the legal papers that would reshape their lives. Teresa had 4 hours before they came home, 4 hours to figure out how to explain to them that their father was taking her to court. 4 hours to decide whether to fight this battle or find a way to surrender with dignity. She called her boss and requested a personal day, then spent the morning walking aimlessly through her neighborhood, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that Joseph's petition had unleashed. By the time she picked up the boys from school, she had made a decision that surprised even her. "Boys," she said as they settled into the car, "we need to have a family meeting tonight. There's something important we need to discuss." "Are we in trouble?" Owen asked with the automatic guilt that 8-year-olds seem to carry. "No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble, but there are some changes coming, and I want to make sure you understand what's happening." That evening, Teresa sat with her 3 sons around their small kitchen table. The legal documents spread out between them, like evidence of her failures as a mother and a woman. "Your father wants to make some changes to our arrangement," she began carefully. "He's asked the court to help us figure out a more official way to share time with you." "What does that mean?" Tristan asked, his serious expression reflecting his understanding that this was more complicated than it sounded. "It means Dad wants to make sure he has the right to be your father without depending on me to give him permission," Teresa explained, trying to be honest without frightening them. "But why would he need permission?" Gareth asked, confused. "He's already our dad." Teresa felt tears threaten as she realized how little her children understood about the legal complexities of their situation. To them, Joseph was simply their father, present, loving, committed. The idea that his relationship with them could be subject to legal disputes was foreign and frightening. "Sometimes," Teresa said slowly, "when parents aren't married, the courts have to help them make decisions about how to take care of their children. Dad wants to make sure that no matter what happens between him and me, he'll always have the right to be part of your lives." "Are you and Dad getting divorced?" Owen asked, his voice small and worried. "We were never married, remember?" Teresa said gently. "But we both love you very much, and we both want to make sure you're taken care of." "Will we have to choose between you?" Tristan asked, and Teresa heard the fear in his voice that mirrored her own. "No," Teresa said firmly. "You'll never have to choose. You'll always have both of us, no matter what the paperwork says." The boys asked more questions about whether they would have to move, whether they would still go to the same school, whether Mom and Dad would still be able to eat dinner together sometimes. Teresa answered as honestly as she could, while trying to reassure them that the core of their family would remain stable. After the boys went to bed, Teresa sat alone with the legal documents and tried to figure out what she was really fighting for. Was she protecting her children from disruption, or was she protecting herself from having to share control? Was she acting in their best interests, or was she simply too afraid to admit that Joseph had proven himself worthy of equal parenting rights? The phone rang at 9:30, interrupting her brooding. "Hello? Teresa, it's me." Joseph's voice was tired, strained. "I assume you received the papers today." "I did. I want you to know that this isn't about punishing you or trying to take the boys away from you. I just need some security, some legal recognition that I'm their father." "By taking me to court?" Teresa asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "By asking the court to formalize what should have been obvious from the beginning," Joseph corrected. "Teresa, I've shown up every day for 7 months. I've been patient, consistent, and respectful of your boundaries. But I can't keep living in fear that you'll decide I'm not worthy of being their father anymore." Teresa was quiet for a long moment, processing his words and the pain she could hear beneath them. "Is this because of what I said last week?" she asked finally. "About us being strangers?" "It's because I finally realized that no matter what I do, you're never going to see me as an equal partner in raising our children. I'm always going to be the outsider seeking permission rather than the father exercising his rights." Teresa felt something crack inside her chest, a wall that had been holding back 9 years of buried emotions. "Joseph," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm terrified that if I let myself depend on you, if I let the boys depend on you completely, you'll realize that this life isn't what you want and you'll leave us again." "And I'm terrified," Joseph replied, "that if I don't fight for legal recognition now, You'll eventually decide that co-parenting with me is too complicated, and you'll find a way to shut me out of their lives entirely." They were both quiet for several minutes, the weight of their mutual fears hanging between them like a bridge neither was brave enough to cross. "So what do we do?" Teresa asked finally. "I don't know," Joseph said honestly, "but I know that these legal papers aren't really what I want. I want us to be a family, all of us together. I want to wake up in the same house as my children and help them with their morning routines. I want to make decisions about their lives together with you rather than through attorneys. I want to love you openly instead of pretending that we're just co-parents who happen to have history." Teresa closed her eyes, feeling the last of her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "What if I can't do it?" she whispered. "What if I try to trust you and I just can't get past the fear?" "Then we'll work through it together," Joseph said simply. "But Teresa, we can't work through anything if we're not even trying to be together." "The boys asked me tonight if they would have to choose between us," Teresa said. "What did you tell them?" "I told them they would never have to choose. But Joseph, I think I'm the one who's been forcing them to choose. I've been making them navigate between two parents who can't figure out how to be in the same room together without lawyers and legal documents." Joseph was quiet for so long that Teresa thought he might have hung up. "I'm going to withdraw the petition," he said finally. "Joseph, no. You were right about needing legal security." "I don't want to be right about that," Joseph interrupted. "I want to be wrong. I want to believe that we can figure this out together as a family, without courts and custody agreements." Teresa felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally spill over. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to trust someone again after being left the way you left me. And I don't know how to prove that I'm worthy of trust without smothering you or pushing too hard," Joseph said. "But maybe we could learn together." Teresa looked around her small kitchen, at the homework assignment stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, at the school photos of her 3 sons, at the life she had built through sheer determination and stubborn love. "If we try this," she said carefully, "if we really try to be a family, it has to be all in. I can't handle any more half measures or probationary periods. What does all in look like to you?" Teresa took a deep breath, about to make the most terrifying decision of her adult life. "It looks like you moving in with us. It looks like sharing a bedroom and making decisions together and arguing about discipline and splitting the grocery shopping. It looks like being married, Joseph, because I can't teach my children that love is enough unless I'm willing to commit to it completely." The silence stretched so long that Teresa began to wonder if she had finally said too much, asked for too much, pushed too hard. "Teresa," Joseph said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to choose," Teresa said, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it through the phone. "Choose us completely and permanently, or choose your legal petition and shared custody and weekend visits. But don't ask me to live in limbo anymore because I can't do it. I choose you," Joseph said without hesitation. "I choose all of you, completely and permanently. I've been choosing you every day for 7 months. Teresa felt something break open in her chest, 8 years of carefully guarded pain finally beginning to heal. "Then come home," she said softly. "Come home to us." 2 hours later, Joseph stood at Teresa's door with a suitcase in one hand and a small velvet box in the other. "I bought this 8 years ago," he said as she let him inside. "I was going to propose the weekend after I left. I've been carrying it ever since, hoping someday I would have the chance to use it." Teresa looked at the ring box, then at Joseph's face, then at her 3 sons, who had crept out of their bedrooms to see what was happening. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, though her heart was already answering. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Joseph said, dropping to one knee right there in her small living room while their children watched with wide eyes and growing smiles. Teresa Newman. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that some people really can change? Through her tears, Teresa saw the man she had fallen in love with 9 years ago. Older now, more mature, scarred by his own mistakes, but committed to never making them again. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with joy and relief, and the overwhelming sense of coming home. Yes, I'll marry you. The boys erupted in cheers, and as Joseph slipped the ring onto her finger, Teresa realized that sometimes the most important journeys weren't about moving forward at all. They were about finding the courage to come full circle, to reclaim what had always belonged to you, and to build something even stronger from the pieces of what had been broken. Later that night, as they tucked their children into bed together for the first time, Owen looked up at both his parents with the satisfied expression of someone whose deepest wish had finally come true. "Now we're a real family," he announced with 8-year-old certainty. "We always were," Teresa said, kissing his forehead. "We just needed time to figure it out." And as she turned off the lights and walked hand in hand with Joseph toward their shared future, Teresa knew that some love stories didn't end with the first kiss or the wedding ceremony. They began with the decision to fight for each other. Every single day, no matter how long it took to find their way home.